O'Malley, Chair of the Government Operations Committee. We're here today to discuss Docket 0209, and it's an ordinance establishing the authority of the Boston Transportation Department to regulate shared mobility businesses. This ordinance seeks to create a flexible license structure that allows the city to regulate businesses offering vehicles and small vehicles for rent on city streets and sidewalks. This matter was sponsored by Mayor Martin J. Walsh and referred to the Committee on Government Operations back on January the 20th, 2019. It should be noted that the Committee on Planning and Development and Transportation, chaired by City Councilor at Large Michelle Wu, held a hearing regarding dockless mobility and electric scooters on back in October of 2018. That was docket number 1169. That hearing was sponsored by my colleague who's here with us, City Councilor Matt O'Malley. Throughout the course of that hearing, there was support for bike share companies and electric scooters coming to Boston. It was also understood how critical it was for the city to have an effective regulatory measures in place, as well as ongoing regional collaboration with nearby municipalities. It was also stressed that the effective regulation is vital to ensuring that this industry does not compromise the city's efforts around Vision Zero and pedestrian safety, enhancing accessibility for members of the disabled community, equity issues, and a range of other related topics. So I'd like to note that this hearing is being streamlined on the Boston City Council TV online. It's also being recorded and will be rebroadcast at a later date at Comcast Channel 8, RCN 82, and Verizon 1964. I'd now like to offer my colleague, who's really been at the forefront of a lot of these initiatives, to give opening remarks before we turn it over to the administration's panel. So without further ado, Councilor Matt O'Malley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for your great leadership and advocacy on this and so many other issues. I will be brief. It's much more important to hear from our panel as well as some of the stakeholders and most importantly members of the public who have showed up today. But it goes without saying I am enormously supportive of micromobility in ways that we can A, remove cars from the road, B, move people around cities, and C, make sure we do it in as safe a manner as humanly possible. And I think a lot of this ordinance gets to that. So I certainly support efforts to create a framework, make sure we do this right. We've seen rollouts in other cities that have gone exceptionally well. We've seen rollouts in other cities that have been very, very poorly conceived. So I think that we have an opportunity to once again do it right, to make sure that we lead and to make sure that we provide a service for our residents while having framework in mind that's going to make this a success. So look forward to continuing work together. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor O'Malley. We're here obviously joined by the administration. I see Chief of Streets Chris Osgood. We have Commissioner of Transportation Gina Fiandaca, and we have the Program Director from the Mayor's Office of Urban Mechanics. That's Michelle Son. So I'll defer it to the panel. Just quick introduction of yourself and for the record, and you have the floor.
Osgood, as you said, I serve as Mayor Walsh's Chief of Streets. I'll offer some very brief introductory remarks, and in the spirit of the two of you, look forward to your questions and really look forward to the public testimony that is here. I'm joined, as you said, by Commissioner Fiandaca and by Michelle Sohn from the Mayor's Office of Newer Mechanics, who really led the drafting of this ordinance. The broad context of this ordinance is that there is immense innovation that's happening right now in this field of micromobility. 2 years ago, it was all about dockless bikes. Last year, it was all about scooters. Truly, who knows what is next on the horizon. And all these innovations, as you noted, Councilor O'Malley, are really focused on this idea of how do we move people in cities in ways that cause less congestion, result in fewer emissions, and cost less than traveling around by a car. And so there's a lot of excitement and enthusiasm around the opportunities for innovation around mobility in general. The City of Boston, however, does not currently have sort of that regulatory clarity that we would need to make sure that any of these innovations are actually being guided towards those things that our residents want most: safe streets, equitable access to transportation, reliable ways of getting around town. And what this ordinance really does is addresses that specific problem. So I'm going to be sort of shortly just lay out what this ordinance is and what this ordinance is not, perhaps starting with what this ordinance is not. To be clear, this is not a pilot of scooters. This is not a pilot of any other form of technology. That is not what this ordinance is. This ordinance also does not set caps. It does not set specific license term. It does not dictate geographies. It doesn't dictate any of those sort of other sort of specifics that would come up if we were ever to pursue a pilot. But what this does do is it basically gives clear authority to the Boston Department of Transportation to be able to manage any shared micromobility service that occurs on our streets. This includes the ability for BTD to be able to issue licenses if and when appropriate to ensure that any licensed companies are operating by a certain set of standards in a certain set of geographies with a set of things like data sharing provisions, things that we would want to ensure were we to go ahead with anything. And obviously, as you both referenced and as we heard loud and clear from the October hearing, ensuring that things like the use and storage of these vehicles would happen in ways that are appropriate and that really respect and allow all of our residents to be able to get around town. It also sets some general common sense provisions around what any sort of micromobility, shared micromobility vehicle could do. For example, they could not exceed 15 miles per hour. And importantly, it also clarifies that if there is an unlicensed provider of shared micromobility services in the city of Boston, that Boston would have the right to be able to impound those vehicles. We've had a lot of conversations over the course of this last year, and again, that October hearing was helpful in advancing that conversation. And with that in mind, this ordinance also calls for the creation of a shared vehicle business advisory committee, a committee that would be comprised of representation from the Disabilities Commission, from the Mayor's Office of Newer Mechanics, from the Environment Department, to help advise Commissioner Fiandaca and her team of the Boston Transportation Department in setting any form of policy around the governance of shared micromobility vehicles. We are certainly a ways off from any sort of changes on our street, but we do appreciate the council taking up this issue now. We wanted to make sure that we had in place, again, that regulatory clarity, which helps both advocates, constituents, innovators understand the way in which we would be thinking about regulating micromobility in the city of Boston. And that is an important sort of precondition before anything could actually happen going forward. So again, we appreciate the opportunity to be here. We appreciate your consideration of this ordinance and look forward to your questions and the testimony from the public.
Very good. Anything additional to add from our commissioner? Good, very good. And we've also been joined by our colleague, City Councilor Frank Baker and City Councilor Mark Siomo. Oh, sorry, I do. We've also been joined by our colleague, Lydia Edwards, out of my peripheral vision. I guess, Chief, if we can just, quick question of you, can you just clarify the differences between vehicle sharing businesses and small vehicle sharing businesses? And I state that only because the term small vehicle sharing businesses was only referenced once in the ordinance.
Sure.
And I just didn't know, I guess it was small a typo or we're dealing with a couple different types of things.
Sure, and Michelle, you may sort of want to dive into the specifics of this, but small vehicle is a defined term within the ordinance and is really meant to sort of focus in on literally vehicles that we're not talking about sort of broad car sharing vehicles. We're talking about sort of smaller shared vehicles on our streets. Right.
So there is a difference between a vehicle sharing business and a small vehicle sharing business, and then again, why it's only referenced once. I don't know if we want to bolster that up a little bit, or
fair point,
or kind of tie something up together so we can clearly distinguish between vehicle sharing businesses and small vehicle sharing business. Where it's only mentioned once, it almost kind of seems like it was sort of maybe a typo or an afterthought. But if there's real meaning to it, if we can maybe beef that up a little bit prior to it coming back for a council vote, that probably makes the most sense. But on that point, Michelle, if you have any thoughts on that.
I echo the Chief of Streets, Chief Osgood's statement on that. The main difference between a small vehicle sharing business and a vehicle sharing business is that a small vehicle does not need to be registered with the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. So we're really focused on those smaller vehicles. The vehicle sharing business would principally be referring to car sharing businesses.
Okay. And then through the Chief, I guess, if you could just check with your folks, I'd like to see if we can add a council designee to the Small Vehicle Sharing Business Advisory Committee. There'll be an advisory committee established, obviously, from the mayor's office, and/or maybe we can have some type of reporting requirement to the clerk's office just to make sure that nothing's falling through the cracks. Commissioner, where do we anticipate the area of service for these electric scooters to be? Or where does your department think that the demand will be?
Sure. The ordinance provides for the applicant to propose a route that would be subject to approval by the advisory committee as well as the transportation department.
Great. And how does the ordinance ensure concerns around accessibility, safety, and equity being addressed, making sure that they're sort of fairly dispersed throughout all of our neighborhoods?
So again, we are We are many steps away from anything that would be a pilot or would get into that level of specificity. What this simply allows is for the Boston Transportation Department to use exactly those sorts of criteria to be reasons we would, or would be sort of the elements of what a license would include. This is, again, it does not specify those things. It just simply allows BTD to use those criteria if and when we would ever have a pilot going forward.
And can you speak to, as to whether or not there's been any sort of regional collaboration with, say, Cambridge or Somerville or Brookline or Quincy?
Yep.
Dedham, any of our sort of abutting?
So Kasha Hart from MAPC will likely speak to this and a little bit. MAPC has been a partner in those conversations. I think, as we already know, those of us here are much more focused on municipal boundaries than understandably our constituents are, and so we've had a lot of regional conversations about this. This, though, obviously is focused really specifically on making sure that we as the City of Boston have the ability to manage any sort of program that would come, whether it was regional or not, on our streets.
And something something I'll think about sort of as it's in committee is very similar to the shopping cart ordinance, where we have, as you know, Commissioner, we see shopping carts show up all over the place. There's a sort of a requirement of the store or the shopping center to retrieve the shopping carts. So I think a concern, at least constituents have raised the issue as to just if they're walking down the street and there's just scooters all over the place. It's like, who's that on? Is that on the city's side of the house, or is it on them? So maybe some language in there that requires, as they reach out to Commissioner Fiandaca to talk about their route, that there's got to be some responsibility and accountability from that company to, I guess, pick up their wares, if you will, so that we don't have scooters strewn all over the place, abandoned, if you will, or they may have taken the scooter to an area where there may not be a lot of people, and then they take the scooter to the place, but they take a car from the place, and the scooter stays there for days. So I just want to make sure that we're on top of that, and we may want to sort of mirror some of the language that we have in the city shopping cart ordinance that puts the onus on the company to go retrieve these devices, and I'm sure they have, whether it's GPS, I'm sure they have some type of system where they can locate their own scooters, but I would want that, I would insist that that language is in there.
We can certainly check that language against the shopping cart ordinance. One of the pieces that's in here in Section 7 is clear authority for the city to be able to impound and charge reasonable fees for anybody who is leaving their vehicle in a way which is inappropriate on municipal streets. But you're right, we can check that against some of the existing programs we have in place to do similar work.
Thank you. Councilor O'Malley, any questions at this time?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. So, Chief, when we had this hearing last fall, I think there was there was talk about establishing a pilot as early as this spring. So it sounds to me that we're putting that on hold for now, and the next step should be passage of this, which sort of sets the regulatory oversight, which would then get into a piloted program. Is that good sort of analysis?
Yeah, I think certainly we are not moving forward on a pilot right now. I think the two pieces that would be precursors to anything, one is the change in the state law. Yeah. The second would be the ability to actually manage any program. Okay, and that's fair. And as the chairman asked, and I know we're going to hear from some folks from MAPC earlier, I think it is incredibly smart, and I applaud you for working regionally, as we've done with the bike share. Are the three other municipalities also putting in similar framework, to your knowledge, in terms of this oversight? In general, I don't know the specifics, and Kosh may be able to testify that. If not, Michelle or the commissioner may know. Okay, my sense is yes, in broad generalities. Great. Okay. And how then would this sort of, I guess, does this change a timeline? I know you're always hesitant, but just out of sort of a ballpark, do you see? Should we vote to accept this? Enable you, Commissioner, to set the guidelines, come up with some safety and oversight? Do you see then a pilot program this calendar year? Again, I know you're hesitant to put a time on it, but how would this change things? I think it would be hard to put a timeline on it. I do think that what this allows is it both would create a framework if and when a pilot would go forward, but it also creates a framework to ensure that some of the concerns which I think constituents here will likely raise, it gives us the clear authority to be able to address some of those concerns. What if scooters are left on city streets as part of an unlicensed program, et cetera? Okay. And I know that some other cities have sent cease and desist letters to operators when they were, some of the scooters specifically were sort of left there. To my knowledge, Boston hasn't done that. I believe we did not. But so the fear that a company would just try to flood the market.
while we sort of are working on these things?
This, I think, gives us that clear ability to be able to share with anybody, here's how we will regulate these sorts of vehicles.
Yeah.
And so if, everyone will have a clear understanding of what the response is and what the authority of the city is if they were to choose to do that.
Okay. What happens currently if you see an individual? I've seen a handful, not that often. I look forward to the day when we're seeing more, hopefully. But if you see someone using one of these electric scooters going down Cambridge Street, have there been any interactions with anyone in BTD or anyone? Is that currently legal?
There are currently certainly individuals who use them on city streets. The state law does define sort of electrified scooters. It defines them in certain ways, has certain design requirements, which some scooters may meet and some scooters do not.
Okay. Have any tickets been issued for scooters that don't meet the requirements?
Not that I'm aware of.
No,
All right. I think, okay.
Do you
good.
chase them?
I think there's a no chase policy, Mr. Chairman.
Chase.
Because I'm curious, I'm reading the definition and as sort of what constitutes a small vehicle, and I would think a Segway would fall under that category, which are allowed. There's sort of a different framework for those.
And it is intentionally, and both the Commissioner and Michelle can speak more to this, this is intentionally not narrowly focused on one particular vehicle type. Just knowing that there's an evolution that is happening, there's innovation that's happening, so we just want to be prepared and have clear guidelines for whatever may come our way.
Okay, and I think please, Commissioner.
So with regard to Segways, we have one company operating in Boston now, which is Boston Segway Tours. So they don't rent Segways, they offer guided tours throughout the city. So they they provide their proposed routes to the Transportation Department and the Police Department. We collectively approve them, and the Police Department provides oversight of the operation of Segway tours.
Okay.
So it's a little bit different. No.
Councilor, if I may, the definition of small vehicle, we saw that problem with the Segway ordinance, and so that the definition of small vehicle actually specifically excludes electric assistive mobility devices, which are also known as Segways by the ordinance. So we addressed that problem in the definition.
Okay. But a Segway for a tour wouldn't be used as a mobility device.
So the ordinance around Segways and regulating Segways actually says that Segway use is not allowed unless specifically approved by the City of Boston, and the way we approve them is through licensed city tours.
Okay. Okay, I know this isn't about Segways. I guess I'm more curious. It seems to me that would electric bikes be in the same category that we're talking about today in terms of the oversight? So bikes with the electric assist, which I know Blue Bike has done in some other neighborhoods and is likely to bring here. Okay. So there'd be no Blue Bikes with electric assist until this.
So, and Michelle, correct me if I'm wrong, this does not conflict with sort of things that are either existing law or existing contract. We have an existing contract with Motivate and Blue Cross Blue Shield to sort of operate that system. And so that system is sort of guided by the contract, not necessarily the specifics of this particular ordinance. Is that fair?
Correct. Yeah.
So if Motivate wanted to do electric scooters, they'd be allowed to do so?
Our work with them is specifically about bikes. So, and just purely about the bike share program, the collective bike share program we've got.
Yeah, and again, I'm one of the bigger proponents, probably the biggest proponent on this body. I want to see more of these things, but it sounds to me that they'd likely go to the electric bikes, which I think is a good thing, particularly as the network grows in the farther-flung neighborhoods, such as where I represent, to allow for folks to use them more. So I wouldn't want to hinder that.
This does not hinder sort of the evolution of the Motivate piece. All I want to clarify is that contract is sort of an existing contract, and that may not be governed by this.
So I guess I both don't want to hinder it. I also don't want to give a free pass to one company when there could be, we want to do what's best for the constituents. All right, I want to let my colleagues go. I guess just briefly, there are a myriad bills at the state legislature that have oversight in terms of this. Are there any that either this administration feels strongly about, one way or the other, or something that seemed is the strongest approach?
So we have not weighed in yet. There's an active conversation in Beacon Hill about adjustments to the Mass General Law. Certainly the piece that we're interested in is ensuring that as they're defining appropriate vehicle types, they've got safety first and foremost in mind.
Of course. No, I know we all share that. And then should we pass this and then the state legislature passes a bill, would that preempt what we're trying to do here, or is this a separate oversight? So this is important to do before the state legislature acts, because it's an opportunity for us to sort of set regulatory oversight.
Exactly.
Okay. That's all for now, but I will have more questions. Thank you, Mr.
Thank you, Council. We've also been joined by our colleague, City Councilor Josh Sakem. Also want to recognize my former colleague, City Councilor Paul Scapicchio is here, and also my former colleague in government, State Senator Jack Hart is here as well. So good to see you both, gentlemen. Chair recognizes Councilor Lydia Edwards.
Thank you very much, Chair. And I wanted to thank my colleague, Councilor O'Malley, for your leadership on this and having, I thought, was a very good, robust conversation about this last year. And so I appreciate also setting the framework for us to let us know what we're doing today and not necessarily promoting a pilot, though I would love to support this with language that says a pilot will happen within the year of passage. So might I suggest that as well? I do feel firmly in at least trying and looking at how this could happen. So I'd love to see potentially some language put in here that talks about a pilot happening. I'd love to see the commitment for that. I don't want this to be a much ado about nothing if at the end of the day we're going to be regulating and then maybe someday seeing a pilot, though I understood your commitment last year was really to see how this could be done. I wanted to also thank you for your hearing, I think, from many members of the community about the advisory group, and again, emphasizing I really do appreciate having members of the disability community on that group. Might I, and to echo Councilor Flaherty's suggestion to have a city council appointee, I also would suggest a youth appointee. You already have, I think, youth advisory group for the city of Boston, but I said during my last testimony, I would be on one of these things if I was a kid, and I don't doubt that a lot of kids would be excited about some version of this. So I think you should also have a youth appointee on this, on the advisory group. I wanted to also talk about some of the other guidelines that the advisory group would be looking at. I see that the licensing is strictly for the actual, I think, the companies. Are you thinking one day about licensing of individuals to ride these, or no?
This is specifically about just
okay.
The companies.
Okay. And then also one thing that I think is worth the advisory group also coming up with is a training and education program, almost a road etiquette program for folks who are interested in this. I'm sure that they would, but I think it's really important that you're also changing not just the rules, but the culture on the streets of Boston. So it would be good to have that, Commissioner.
Yeah, we also require the applicant to submit a safety plan as well as a public engagement campaign and an educational campaign. So those are all components of their application that the advisory committee would consider before granting a license.
Do you have any idea how many licenses you might be granting?
I don't think that we have defined how many we would grant. I think that part of the impetus for this proposal is so that we're ready if state law changes and these devices are granted approval to operate within the Commonwealth. And we applaud the council here for really engaging the community in this important conversation.
Right. No, I think it's well worth noting that I think what we lost with some folks, with some of the biking community, where they felt that there's an education on both the drivers and the biking community that seems to still be growing and needs improvement, that we have an opportunity at the very beginning of a new vehicle to get ahead of that. Again, education for drivers as well as for folks who are going to be on the scooters. It's a safety issue. But I just wanted to say thank you. I think it's well written. I think this is a great first step. Thank you, Commissioner. But also, again, would love to see a committed language to at least within a certain time frame to have a pilot program. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor. Chair recognizes City Councilor Frank Baker.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, everybody. Thanks for coming in. So when we talk about, this is about granting licenses to one company that would operate, sort of like the bike sharing, same sort of thing. This is a licensing process. You have a license to bring in, like, how many units do they bring in? When this license is granted, is that up to them to figure out, or? So
this gives the commissioner the authority to determine how many licenses, the duration of those licenses, all those sort of components, how many different companies could be involved. It simply gives the ability to create a program. It doesn't define what that program looks like.
Yeah, so we're not going to, it's not going to be one operator or one license.
Yeah, that's not defined as
what is the city's benefit other than providing transportation, what is the city's monetary budget benefit from the bike sharing program? What does that bike sharing program give to us?
Sorry, from the existing Blue Bike program?
Existing, yes.
I don't have that off the top of my head. Certainly the revenue from that, and you maybe will speak more to this, goes back to sort of ensuring that we have a strong and expanding bike share program across the city. And so we are trying to ensure that the Blue Bike program actually helps us expand the Blue Bike program to more neighborhoods across the city of Boston.
But do they pay anything for doing business, or they're just there?
I mean, their revenue, to the best of my knowledge, is essentially plowed back into the operation and the expansion of the actual program.
Of their business. So the city of Boston gets nothing from it?
I mean, one thing
Aside from the expanding transportation?
I think one thing, I think we very much view Motivate as a partner of ours, and that this is that system is a public bike share system. It's one that is collectively owned by Boston, Brookline, Cambridge, and Somerville, and so I think in that particular case, they're the ones who are operating that program, but it is a public bike share program.
And what about like the advertisement that happens?
Yep.
Is that
on the
theirs
panels.
or is that ours?
Yep. So that is part of the revenue that allows for that bike program to be able to operate, for it to be able to expand.
So they don't pay anything?
I mean, they run the system.
They don't pay us anything? Just making a point, I don't think they're paying anything. Because, and I'm going to bring this back to Uber here. Now, Uber, 170 rides in Boston every day. What do we get from them? We don't get that dollar. If we got $1 a day from Uber, we'd be able to fix a lot of our transportation issues. We let that get away from us. Now, bike sharing doesn't pay anything. These here won't pay anything if we keep doing business the way we do. Santa Monica does, and it's minimal. Yeah. It's $1 per unit a day. So they have 4 contracts, 4 different companies, bike sharing and these whatever the scooters. Thank you. And each company is allowed to get 750 units. They do, whether if it's might be 400 bikes and 300, but it's $1 a unit per day for these companies because, and someone explained this to me, that they're making money on the rides. It's not a whole lot of money probably if it's $1 a ride, $2 a ride, but where they're making the money is with data sharing. They take all that data and they share it around, making tons of money. So I would say, should suggest that what are they paying to us? We're sharing their data. Well, I'm not going to be sharing my data with them because you won't see me on one of these things. But what are they paying us a day? I know they're expanding transportation and everything, but how much does it cost us when something like that person that's on the scooter hits a pothole that we never filled, and then they roll over, smash their heads? It's cops, it's ambulances. What's that costing us?
So 2 notes on that. This does actually allow us to be able to have revenue from these companies. It doesn't define what that is, but it simply gives us the authority.
I see a $500 licensing fee.
That is simply for the application. That is not the actual, that's not revenue beyond that. To your point, there are opportunities to think about.
Because I don't think we should have a repeat of Uber. I mean, I'm almost thinking, I think the bike sharing should be giving us something. That parking spots on every main street. How much is a parking spot to rent? If you got a loading dock, if I'm a business operator that's been in Dorchester Ave 50 years, if I want a loading dock, I got to pay $3,000 a month.
So I think the comparison, I think there's a slightly difference in comparison here. So with the Blue Bike system, again, it is a publicly owned system. We own the bikes, we own the docks. These are all things that are being
we
done.
own all those
these
bikes?
are assets that we own. Motivate is simply running that system, which is, again, a publicly owned bike share system. So that is it is a benefit to us to be able to have revenue from things like membership or advertising on the stations, to be able to actually allow us to ensure that system is high quality, that's affordable, and that it expands.
So all that money does come back to us then?
It comes back to the system. We're not using it for other line items right now other than sort of having a great bike share system.
So that bike sharing system generates $3 million a year, we spend $3 million. Amazingly, we spend $3 million a year on, or whatever the numbers are. We spend exactly what comes in.
We basically use it to get to more neighborhoods. There are counselors here who we've been able to reach, including yourself, and be able to, again, keep prices affordable for membership, ensure that we've got discounted memberships. There's a whole set of things that are, I think, slightly different about a publicly owned bike share system. And what we're talking about here, which is how do we set up, and I agree with your point, how do
And
we
this
set
one
up?
isn't publicly owned,
These
this
are,
one is private.
these are about allowing, if we ever want to allow, of any sort, any private micromobility provider, scooter, otherwise, we ever want to allow that, what are the terms we would, what are the abilities that we would want to have in that situation? And one of the things which we want to have the ability to do, and we completely agree with you on this, is the ability to actually think about what would be an appropriate sort of revenue from such a system that's operating on a city street when there's private transactions that are happening in the public right of way.
Yeah, because by no means am I opposed to this. I think it'd be great if we're able to, like Gina said, we're looking for routes. How are you gonna have this company that's dealing with hundreds of people, thousands of people a day? Okay, here's your route. You can only stay on this. How do we do that, Gina?
So, Councilor, just to go back to your point about the administration of the program, the ordinance calls for a $500 application fee. We think that is more aligned with what we're charging for food trucks right now. But beyond that, the annual fee shall be set by the commissioner, by the Transportation Department, informed by the advisory committee.
Are we just opposed to getting a daily fee? Number of units?
I don't think we've
'Cause it's
defined
our job to
exactly
figure out how-
what that would look like and how that would best allow for proper administration of the program and support the resources that the city would be required to expend in order to support the safe operation and encourage this form of mobility.
I'm not sure I get
So
your point. So
what
by
this,
not charging, it's
I don't think we've said that we're not charging. I
Okay.
think that the ordinance allows us to determine what that fee should be.
okay. So I would advocate that we're charging a daily fee for these because it's going to add to the chaos in the street. You know, however way you slice it, it's going to add to, people are just getting used to a bike showing up next to them on the street. Now it's going to be, okay, watch out for that bike. What's this thing behind me here? Now, I think we should be charging, and there also should be one of the major problems. And when Bird showed up in Santa Monica, they just showed up. They didn't ask permission. They just showed up, and it was literally every corner, handicap ramps. These things were all over the place. There ought to be the same as the bike sharing. There ought to be bins that they have to go to. You know, maybe there's more of them. There has to be bins that they go to so that we're collecting them in some kind of fashion, because not everybody cares about where they are going to leave these things. I don't want to come off like I'm combative here, but I'm in support of these, but I'm frustrated with what's happening with, you know, the other ride sharing.
Yeah. Your points are very well taken, Councillor, and that is the reason why we wanted to draft this ordinance, to have this conversation with the council so that we're prepared and that we can design a program that best supports our residents in the city, working with you, working with an advisory committee, so that as we offer these mobility options, as the chief indicated at the beginning, truly we don't know what the future holds, but one thing is certain is that we need to be prepared.
Excellent. Thank you, guys.
One comment, just, again, appreciate your support on things like our update of the TNC bill. Obviously, that's something which the mayor has been pushing, so I appreciate the council's support on that, and we can certainly have more conversations about that.
Thank you, Council Baker. Chair recognizes Council Siomo.
Thank you, and thank the maker for this additional hearing, and I agree with Councilor Edwards. Last fall's hearing was very robust and very meaningful. I'd like to ask, my understanding was that these scooters would get collected every evening to be recharged, so they'd be cleared up from the streets. Is there like a certain time, like that they wouldn't be available?
So I think I want to sort of differentiate between how any particular program would run and what this ordinance does. This ordinance really is just simply what are the authorities that we would want the city to have to run any type of program or to sort of manage any type of unlicensed program. Similar to Councilor Baker's point, do we want to think about how things are stored on the curb or hours or revenue, all those sort of pieces? We are a long way off from from really the specifics.
The details.
Exactly. And again, this is not about a pilot. This is just simply
whether they should wear helmets or whatever.
What's the type of authority we'd want to have to be able to manage whatever might come.
Right. And I would just make a suggestion suggestion then that whatever fee structure there is, that it at least pays for whatever staff that is necessary to administer the program. Too many times, I think, we as counselors, we propose things and we don't actually factor in the staff and infrastructure necessary to administer it and sustain it over time. And then we end up taking from the BTD budget to pay for another ordinance that we put in ISD, for example. So I would just make that suggestion.
Appreciate that.
And that's all I have.
Thank you, Councilor Siomo. Chair recognizes Councilor Zachem.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank Councilor O'Malley for his advocacy and enthusiasm for this new form of transportation for the city, and thank you all, and certainly the mayor, for putting this proposed ordinance forward. I will start off by saying I am a fan. I have not ridden on a scooter in quite some time, but I think it is an important aspect of our transit infrastructure, easing our traffic issues, which are well known to everyone in this room, certainly when it comes to climate change, doing whatever we can to address that. And just quickly, I want to talk about a fee structure. Certainly, I don't think the city should be spending money on this, but I don't want to see onerous fees that will discourage this. I think the Uber, TNC situation, Lyft, whatever, is very different in that those companies and their users, of which I am one, are contributing to the congestion and the greenhouse gases in the city of Boston versus the scooters, which, to my mind, will be easing those. So I do think it's a very different conversation, but I do think the fee structure for TNCs, as I believe everyone, or most of the folks in this room does, should be significantly increased. Having said all the good things, I have some very serious concerns about this, which I've shared, I think, with some of you, certainly with some of the operators, and what I've heard from many of my neighbors, particularly in the Back Bay and Beacon Hill, because ADA access issues, not just to the vehicles themselves, and I don't know if there's a solution on that front, making these vehicles accessible, but also on our sidewalks. This has been a continuing issue, particularly along Newbury Street, which I would hazard to guess is going to be a popular location for people to drive or ride or whatever the proper term is, the scooters. I do know, and from talking with some of the folks who are Bird and some of the other companies that are looking to do this, they have put in their proposals and they've said that they'll have folks who go around and collect and do this and do that. My concern is the timeliness and the comprehensiveness of that. I was very pleased to see, I think it's 21.3 and 21.7 in the ordinance allowing the city to collect these if they're improperly disposed of. I can only say that that is really my overwhelming concern with the introduction of these in the city of Boston. I think there are certainly many neighborhoods where even if one's left on a sidewalk, although that's not what we want to encourage, it's not going to be debilitating to access. But given the situation on, I think of Newbury Street and Charles Street in particular, Charles Street and Beacon Hill, Newbury Street and Back Bay, popular places, that's great. As an able-bodied individual who's walking, I sometimes have a tough time navigating the crowds, the sandwich board signs, which are a whole other issue I'm going to continue raising with ISD in those areas. So that is paramount. Whatever program, whether it's through the RFP process, whether it's through regulations, Commissioner, that you develop in your agency, we need to be not just saying there's an ordinance that says you can't leave the scooters on the sidewalk. We need a real system in place. Now, I don't know how precise some of the geofencing tools are. I know that's an option. I would certainly look forward to hearing. I think we're going to hear from some of the operators about this, and certainly further down the road, how precise we can be. Whether that means, as I think Councilor Baker was saying, designated areas in every neighborhood, taking a parking space and saying, on Newbury Street in particular, say there's a parking space, used to be a parking space here, you can, whether it's Bird or a competitor, you can drop off your scooter here, that's fine. Is the technology there to make sure that's the only place on that block that they can be dropped off? So I can't reiterate enough how concerned I would be about issues on the sidewalks from an access standpoint, not just because it's visually unappealing. So that's it. I'd happy to hear if you have comments on that at this point, but perhaps that's something for down the road.
I think I want to say that that was a great, I think we heard overwhelmingly in October. We certainly appreciate that feedback, and that is, to your point, why those sections of this ordinance are sort of very clearly articulated.
Great.
Thank you, Councilor Zachem. Chair recognizes Councilor Siomo. Just a follow-up question.
Yeah, just to follow up on the blue bikes and how that's structured, and I guess I get that we're talking apples and oranges, but if we generate $3 million in revenue, or $3 million is generated through the Blue Bikes program, does that actually pay for the staff that administers the program, like, I'm not going to name names, but the Bike Czar and other staff associated with administering the program?
So we can get you a full breakdown, unless, Commissioner, you know it off your head, but we can get you a full breakdown of sort of the sort of sources and uses.
They're housed up at BPDA, correct?
No, so there are members of the Commissioners Program who look sort of very broadly at all active transportation. The actual day-to-day though operations of the Blue Bike system, the rebalancing of bikes, the promotion of the program, the handling of memberships, all those sort of pieces, that's sort of the core of what Motivate does. And so and those are the sort of things that are funded through the actual sort of program fees.
Right, so I guess the question is, does the city pay separate from that for staff to administer the program?
No, they're essentially, we have broad governance in the same way in which we have an interest in figuring out how do we expand it, how do we site locations with all of you. But the real sort of management of the program is essentially done through Motivate and the collaboration with and the support they get from Blue Bikes and other sponsors.
Okay.
But we can get you, I can get you more detail.
It's more of a contract oversight responsibility that's within the active transportation division of the Transportation Department, which is now part of the planning unit. So we've integrated it fully within our planning division. So the staff in that unit are responsible for all things related to active transportation, as well as neighborhood slow streets and community outreach.
Right, so, but my point is the city has city-paid staff administering the program aside from the revenue. So none of the revenue goes to support these positions. Is that accurate? None of their revenue, so we don't get anything, to Frank's point, Councilor Baker's point. The revenue, the $3 million that they generate pays for administration.
Yeah, I just got that number, that's not an actual.
Okay.
I'm mindful that we have two former operators of this actual program who are in this chamber, who can probably speak in much more detail on this than I can. But there's a tremendous amount that we get from this. I mean, we have.
I agree.
So, and I think the actual sort of contract oversight in comparison to the actual operation of the program, it is a small amount of contract oversight for the operation of a massive region-wide public program. And so I think that we get a huge amount of value in addition to the actual tangible assets themselves, the stations, the bikes, et cetera.
Right.
So I think it's a very different type of program, and one that, frankly, where because it is public, we have a much better ability to ensure that it actually is more equitably distributed, that the memberships are actually at accessible price points, that the bikes are of high quality, all sorts of things that we think are really important to a great program.
Right. Well, I was here when it was first started, and my neighborhood had a great exposure to it, actually, back when, I forget her name. Nicole, yeah, exactly. But I think that when, again, the fees or whatever is generated through the contract should actually help us with the revenue necessary, no more, no less, to help administer it, because you're going to have a staff member take however many hours a week to administer this, which wasn't on their plate before.
Right.
That's all. That's kind of.
We do appreciate that perspective, Councilor.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor O'Malley has. Thank you, Councilor Siomo. Councilor O'Malley has a follow-up.
Thank you. Just briefly, read through it. Just want to make some suggestions. This is just to help with transparency. First, I want to echo the chairman's call for Section 17-21-4A, the Small Vehicle Sharing Business Advisory Committee. I would urge you to add a council designee, either the council president or whomever, the relevant council that would determine it. For Section 17-21.5A, which talks about the limits on small vehicles, the last sentence reads, Boston Transportation shall evaluate this limit from time to time to determine whether the limit should be adjusted. Maybe we include, but no less than yearly, if that's helpful to you. I mean, I don't want to, and then also if we could publicly report the findings, add some language about that on the website. I think you may get into that later. The section 1721.5C, the maximum speed, C, number 6, the maximum speed of small vehicles made available by a small vehicle sharing business shall not exceed 15 miles an hour. I'd suggest maybe lowering that to 12 miles an hour. I think that seems to be, in my preliminary research, more of the standard. But I recognize you say not exceed 15, so that maybe gives you the right wiggle room, but 12 might be a better number. And then finally, for 1721.5C, number 10, the small vehicle sharing business shall be required to meet with community and business groups as directed by the Commissioner in consultation with the Advisory Committee ahead of launching service. I think that's key. I think that's one thing we do well in development. I'd add District Counselor's Office as well, just to make sure, since many of us are on the front lines and want to be included in this as well. I think it's a better way to increase transparency and openness and better community process. So those are my 4 suggestions, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Councilor O'Malley, and follow-up from Councilor Baker.
Chris, so the bike sharing, what do they do with their data? Do we have anything to do with their data, or are they selling that data also?
I will get back to the specifics, but we have a good understanding, and they are actually public with the general sort of anonymized trips, like origin and destination trips. So we actually have some access to the flows of bikes.
Yeah, but I mean the actual data. Are they selling that information to anybody else?
I will confirm.
Because if they are, they're making a ton of money there, and maybe that's where we go, Chris. Yeah. Because there's more. They're not coming here because it's a public good. They're coming here because they're making tons of money on it. Where is the money? Why isn't there anyone coming back here? That's all I'm saying. You know, maybe it's not in the trips. It's not very much money. Is the money in the data sharing? Is that data going someplace else that we don't know about? What are these companies doing with the data? And if they are selling it, that's our piece, Chris. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Chair. I recognize Councilor Lydia Edwards for a follow-up.
Thank you very much. And I echo the edits from my colleagues thus far. I just wanted to also add that we've had many, many conversations about equity in the city of Boston with the newest emerging industry of cannabis, and trying to make sure that as we're regulating that, we are really assuring that the wealth that is to be made from it is spread across all of Boston, all neighborhoods. Neighborhoods also get the burdens, but benefits from it as well. And I just wanted to make sure this is to me is part of the same conversation. It's an emerging industry, and I want to in the regulations to either have some sort of language put in acknowledging that, and that there will be some sort of equity analysis. What I also suggest that would help with that is in section 1721.4 on the advisory committee, adding in a member of the BEC or some sort of commission that already is dedicated to, or having, I guess, economic development nominate somebody who is already committed to. I think there's a new equity officer in Chief Barros's economic development department, that either she or someone from them, from the BEC or Chief Barros's office, come in and also be a part of this conversation. I think it's happening in silos right now, but in as much as, or until we have a general commission dedicated to this, I'd like to see their member directly advising about how this can be equitably implemented in terms of also suppliers, giving you the authority, right? So when you're putting out the RFP, you automatically are talking about equity and assuring that the ownership opportunities, the ridership opportunities, all reflect the diversity of Boston.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor. Thank you to the panel. Unless the panel has any questions of the committee, just can I ask if you can just hang tight? We have a few folks that have asked to give public testimony. So, folks, this is the time for public testimony. If anyone is here that wishes to offer public testimony, may do so now by indicating and signing the sheet over there. I do have a sheet in my hand. We have 2 microphones to my left and to my right behind the panel. So feel free, whatever one is closest to you. Looks like Elia Laffer will be the first. Elliot, I'm sorry, Elliot, Your penmanship would not pass Sister Evelyn's class in the first grade at St. Bridget's for sure, but Elliot Laffer, welcome from the Neighborhood Association of the Back Bay. You have the floor. If you can just introduce yourself for the record and give us your thoughts.
My name is Elliot Laffer, and I'm from Neighborhood Association Back Bay. I've lived in Back Bay now for 45 years, which means I must be getting to be a senior citizen. And I walk a lot around the city, and so I have two concerns around the scooters. One concern, which many people have mentioned, is where they get left. And we were just on vacation in Austin, where they seem to be left everywhere. And if you weren't tripping over a scooter, you were tripping over a bike. The second issue is to just make sure that they're not riding on sidewalks. You know, we have an exemption. It's not clear where one can ride a bicycle. And technically on commercial streets, you can't ride a bicycle on a sidewalk, although that's observed in the breach a lot. And on residential streets, you can, which I understand because little kids ride on bikes, but isn't always helpful when they're not little kids. And for those of us who get a little bit older and move a little bit slower than we used to, and you can't hear a bike coming up, and you won't hear a scooter coming up, it becomes very dangerous. And 12 or 15 miles an hour is really fast on a sidewalk, but pretty slow on the street. So the thing that struck me is, okay, this sounds like a great mobility plus, except there's no obvious place where they ought to be. And I think we need to figure out that regulation. And in terms of my handwriting, I used to turn in orders as a salesman, and the customer service people said, would you please take your socks off first? So it's been a problem for a long time. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Elliot. Kezia Hart, who will be followed by Scott Mullen, who will be followed by Hannah Smith, Martin Roeder, and Olivia Richard. And again, you can alternate microphones if that. No, you're right there. So welcome. State your name and affiliation for the record, and you have the floor.
Sure. My name is Kasha Hart. I'm a transportation policy and planning specialist with the Metropolitan Area Planning Council. Just wanted to offer some comments that I think will further the conversation that's already begun here today. So by way of background, the Metropolitan Area Planning Council is the regional planning agency for 101 cities and towns in Metro Boston. I and my colleagues have been working closely with staff from the Transportation Department, the Mayor's Office of New Urban Mechanics, as well as planning staff in Cambridge, Somerville, and Brookline on thinking about a coordinated regional approach to electric scooters in future iterations of micromobility. I'm here today to not only speak in support of this ordinance, but also to offer additional context regarding planning and research that's already happened to date in this topic area. Our agency has a long history of working with these 4 communities on regional transportation services, most notably coordinating efforts around the Blue Bike system. Since the fall of last year, we've been facilitating discussions with staff from the 4 municipalities in an effort to think critically about an approach for regulating electric scooters, as well as whatever may be down the pipeline next in terms of micromobility. Electric scooters will present similar mobility opportunities and challenges as bike share, and we commend the cities and towns for working together in this regard. The conversations to date have centered on key guiding principles for successful electric scooter sharing, including user safety, equity, and enhancing local mobility options. While the exact details of how regional coordination could come to fruition are still being determined, there has been general interest in adopting some common regulations that would be incorporated into the appropriate local permitting or licensing processes, such as one that this ordinance would authorize. These regulations would be minimal, focusing on key elements needed to ensure regional coordination should scooters cross municipal boundaries, and would allow plenty of room for additional municipality-specific regulations. The idea is not to over-regulate, but rather to be practical about how scooters and micromobility can serve regional transportation needs. We intend to continue to meet regularly with our municipal partners and further refine opportunities for local and regional coordination. We look forward to working with City of Boston staff and other stakeholders at the city on these issues. Thank you for the opportunity to speak today. I'm happy to serve as a resource as needed.
Thank you very much for your testimony. Scott Mullen, Scott around?
Good afternoon, Chairman Flaherty, distinguished members of the council. Thanks for coming here today. We've had so many meetings about scooters. You guys sick of it yet? Thank you so much. So my name is Scott Mullen. I am the Director of Expansion here in the Northeast for Lime. Chris had mentioned that there are some operators of your Blue Bike network in the room. I was actually the launch GM of Hubway back in 2011 when it was called Hubway, before the new title sponsor came in to support what is a great network and continues to expand. So no stranger to mobility in the region. We are currently operating Lime bicycles and electric bikes in the region through a coordinated network with the MAPC, who has proven to be a great partner to make sure that mobility options that happen here and are moving around the region are actually serving the region and serving all the residents here. So it really is important to have that. We are based in California, and we are a mobility company. We have bicycles, electric scooters, and we're piloting car sharing in Seattle right now, a free-floating model. What we want is mode shift. What we want to do is enable people to get around in a different way. Any trip that's 4 miles or less in a dense urban area, and that's 50% of the trips that happen in this country, we believe should not happen in a single occupancy vehicle or in a car at all, if we can help it. Since we launched our first vehicle in June of 2017, Lime riders globally have logged more than 25 million trips. This is unprecedented. Micromobility is a real thing. We're just one company, and we're logging numbers like this. Our vision is to revolutionize mobility in cities, empowering residents with greener, more efficient, and affordable transportation options. And we really come in collaboratively to work with cities around your municipal goals. We know the impact that we can have is going to be greater when we're working with our municipal partners. And I'm here today to applaud these draft regulations and commend Mayor Marty Walsh for the release of these mobility regulations. It's a testament to the diligence and vision of the dedicated staff that's in front of you today. Obviously have done a ton of work. These are a great start. And if I could just make 2 quick comments about them. One is with regards to 1721-5A, excuse me, limits on small vehicles. It's important to, as we work collaboratively, to think about what are the outcomes that we want rather than how do we keep away what we don't want. And I think the initial rollout by some other companies in this space has sort of put cities off guard and caused them to be reactionary and say, we only want 100, that's all you can have. And what that does is, with a static cap, it sort of keeps the greater impact low. The user experience is bad because you can't find a scooter. What we would suggest are dynamic caps. These things are rolling computers. We know when they're being used, we know where they're being used, and we know what the demand is and how we can serve that. And so we would ask for dynamic caps based on simple trips per vehicle per day. We call it TVD, trips per vehicle per day milestones. And if we're hitting the operational guidelines that the city has laid out for us and we're able to serve this demand, we should be able to scale up and down with it in real time. And yes, that does mean down as well, because we're going to see seasonality as well. So in the winter, when things, a bit more precipitation, things slow down a little bit, we wouldn't put out as many vehicles. So it's really a very dynamic and flexible system that we would ask for. Number 2 would be 1721-5E. Around the to be determined annual fee as set by the commissioner. As any business would ask for, Lime desires predictability and consistency with regard to regulatory fees. We're not against fees, we're just looking to be able to run a business that is sustainable and will be here 5 years down the road. This is not a flash in the pan to us. We believe we can have a massive impact on cities moving forward and how people move around them. And we just need a consistent and predictable framework.
Scott, which section is that?
1721.5E. We encourage any fee structure to be in line with actual costs to the city for enforcement, administration, and oversight, as has been stated before this committee earlier. And to the extent possible, any fees collected, we believe, should be dedicated to expanding the infrastructure needed to support the program. Things like bike lanes, parking options, charging facilities, and such, things that we would work with the city on. Essentially, the goal is to encourage positive municipal outcomes in a thoughtful, comprehensive way. And I heard someone talk about Uber earlier, and it's important to think of us in a framework, in a transportation framework. And, you know, whatever fees are associated with one mode, let's put this in a broader calculus around other modes as well. And let's figure out how to right-size this. So in closing, I'd just like to thank Chairman Flaherty for hosting this discussion today. Given the seasonality of our business and the clear positive impact we've had in other cities and we believe we can have here, we would like these pilots to be started as soon as possible with respect to all sides here. And I look forward to being supportive in this process. Consider me a resource. We're always here to answer questions. So thank you for your time.
Thank you, Scott.
We actually...
Through the chair.
What do you do with your data?
So we share our data with cities for free. And part of the Lime approach is collaboration. And if you think about it, what we want are better conditions, right? And right now our streets are sort of 95% for cars, 5% for everybody else. And we're trying to reconfigure that. And what we're able to do, when I was running the Hubway, now Blue Bike network, we only had trip origin, trip destination, and duration. So we never knew exactly where these vehicles, these bicycles were going. We have GPS on all of our vehicles now. We know specifically where they're going and provide our municipal partners.
But you need a credit card and identification to get your trip, correct?
Identification meaning?
Well, a license or anything, like to get in, or just your credit card gives you everything about
the payment option.
What happens with that information?
Well, we're PCI compliant. We use a third-party processing. Stripe is one in there, a national standard. No credit card information crosses our servers. We actually don't even collect demographic data except for survey purposes. So when you sign up for us, you don't need to tell us, how much you make or where all of that other information. We can get that through surveys. If you want to sign up with Facebook, there's a way to sort of get that, but that's not the data that we're talking about. The data we're talking about is the trip and route data that allows the planning department to make better decisions about where infrastructure changes would be most impactful for the city. And that's the sort of collaborative approach we come, and we want to have an impact here beyond. This isn't selling ice cream cones down by Fenway, right? This is a transit network that we want to bring to the city, and we want to be seen as collaborative partners in that.
Mr. Chair, one more question. Sure. So the business model, like how else are these companies making money other than the trips, the advertising that's on? Like, are there any other ways you're making money?
Right now, we do not.
Are you selling any of your data, sharing any of your data for money?
Not for money. No, we're sharing it with municipalities for planning purposes, yeah. But no, we don't sell any of that data.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
If you could stay with us, Scott.
I just wanted to note the distinction, and I thought that was really good to note on your part, that we would be getting the data for free so that we're also able to see positive and negative impacts on our communities. I'm assuming we would get it unfiltered and we would just get it possibly in real-time data as well?
That's correct. It's the industry standard is emerging to be the mobility data specification, MDS, which sort of encapsulates GBFS, General Bike Share Feed Specification, which is rolled into MDS. So you get that and then more, and that is a fire hose.
Right.
And I know you've got smart people that are able to decipher it. Not every city does. So.
Well, no, I mean, I'm just wondering how you could connect that with the network that we already have with BTD and looking at monitoring around the city for potential car accidents and things like that. I just think it's a wonderful conversation and collaboration, and just to note with distinction, for this kind of data that we've asked for from other sharing companies such as Airbnb, the city was outright just sued. So I just want to note the difference and the approach that you're taking and giving it to us for free. When we asked to implement our regulations for short-term rental from Airbnb, they sued us to prevent from giving us anything. So I think that that's setting off the conversation much better. So thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Edwards. Thank you very much, Scott. Appreciate your time and attention. Hannah Smith is here with us, and Hannah will be followed by Martin Roeder and Olivia Richard. And if there's anyone in addition to that wishes to offer testimony, just make sure that you sign the sign-in sheet. So welcome, Hannah. State your name and affiliation for the record.
Mr. Chair, just as I did the last time, I want to disclose Hannah Smith was a wonderful, valued employee of mine several years ago. So I just wanted to acknowledge that as well.
Good to see you back, Hannah.
Yeah,
Welcome.
Nice to see you all. Thank you so much for having me today. I do have a brief prepared testimony, and then I'm happy to answer similar questions as well on data sharing and where conversations are going with the city. But good afternoon, councilors. My name is Hannah Smith, and I'm a government relations manager at BIRD for the Northeast. I'm here to express BIRD's support for Boston's proposed ordinance on e-scooters. In the time since I've been working with you all on bringing BIRD to Boston, I've seen tremendous vision and leadership that will make the city's residents safer and healthier. As you know, Boston is one of the most congested cities in the country and was recently ranked as the city with the 7th worst traffic in the United States. E-scooters offer a unique opportunity for Boston to tackle that problem head-on, providing a solution at no cost to the city to help improve those metrics and put the city on a path to being safer and more car-free. 40% of car trips in America are less than 3 miles long. In cities where BIRD is available, people are increasingly opting for affordable, emission-free options instead of a car for those short trips. In Portland, for example, the city found that 1/3 of all e-scooter trips would have gone in a car had an e-scooter not been available. In Washington, D.C., 90% of all BIRD riders say that they use our scooters to go to work, to go to school, or to run errands. BIRD is working to help improve cities, and we hope to do the same for Boston. We already have a vision of what launching in Boston would look like, including a robust public engagement plan ready to go that focuses on community engagement and empowering communities in transit deserts to safely share the road. BIRD offers a comprehensive suite of solutions for our riders and communities to deliver best-in-class service that helps protect the public right-of-way and increase mobility for all. For instance, as Councilor Zakem alluded to earlier, we hope to offer our Bird Watchers in Boston, which is a team of locally hired and trained individuals who help with daily fleet management. Bird Watchers inspect every vehicle that's on the street every day to ensure that every scooter is parked properly and that any possible issues are addressed as quickly as possible. We also now offer community mode in our app. It's an in-app platform that empowers anybody to report instances of poor parking so that we can immediately address and correct those concerns. Community mode was built because of feedback that we received from government partners in other cities who requested an in-app solution to address parking and sidewalk congestion. Cultivating strong working relationships with cities that we operate in is core to BIRD's operating model, and it's conversations like those with our government partners that ultimately create better products and better experiences for riders and constituents. Central to our mission is ensuring that anybody can partake in the fight against climate change, and we're deeply committed to ensuring that our service is rooted in equity. Boston is a leader in climate resiliency and planning, and bringing e-scooters to Boston only furthers the goal of making Boston carbon neutral by 2050. BIRD is already an affordable option, but we also offer special discounts to individuals on public assistance so that our environmentally friendly service can be more easily available to more underserved communities. Additionally, BIRD's website and smartphone app can be accessed in 14 languages and dialects. Translation services are available through our customer service number in several languages, with more languages being added each week. Boston has long been a leader in accessibility, and we are eager to work with you as you continue to raise the bar and make Boston a city that works for all residents. On a similar note, BIRD will work with you as conversations around creating a municipal ID move forward to make sure that any new forms of identification are accepted in our app as soon as they're available. These are the kinds of services that we're eager to bring to Boston, and we are so thrilled that the city and the council have stood up to become a global leader on this issue. Thank you, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much, Hannah. Question, Councilor Zakem has a question. Hannah.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Hannah, good to see you back here in City Hall. And I guess this question could have easily gone to Lime as well. You know, the sort of plan or the Bird Watchers, your in-app pickup for improperly parked scooters, for lack of a better word, that's a great initiative. I'm glad to see it in there. But, you know, when someone is obstructed going down the sidewalk, they're going to be sitting there for an hour, 2 hours. Most realistically, they're going to have to go turn around, go somewhere else. I mean, if this is a question, you know, for you, maybe in other cities you've operated in, or if this is information you need to find for us, that's fine. What technologically can be done to say, you're not allowed, like, the app will not let you, you know, you don't get credit for returning the scooter, or, you know, you're still charged, or whatever it is, if you're leaving it on, you know, it's like on Newbury, we'll use Newbury Street again.
Yeah.
You've left it on Newbury Street between Exeter and Fairfield. There's thousands of people walking by, people with strollers and wheelchairs, whatever it is. Is that a technological fix? Is there something possible there? And
yeah, so that's a great question, and I think e-scooters as a whole have lots of carrots and sticks for how to regulate parking, for lack of a better way to phrase it. But some of the things that Bird has done specifically is that we do require all of our users to take photos of their scooters to close out their rides. So you continue to get charged if you don't take a photo. We then can check that, and if somebody is a repeat offender or just leaves a scooter that is egregiously parked, we can either suspend their account for a couple of days, or if they're a repeat offender, we can just suspend their account in full. In terms of parking for areas where, and I think that this is something that we're really excited to work with Chief Osgood and the Commissioner on, is that we certainly agree with the fact that there are areas where sidewalk congestion needs to be regulated. And I think that we all understand the inherent benefits of dockless transportation here, but we do have to regulate parking to some degree. So you have cities across the country that are creating physical parking spaces. So that's either taking a street parking spot or finding sidewalk space that just isn't in the foot traffic pattern. And you can designate that as dockless parking. It doesn't have to be just for Bird or just for scooters. And it can be something as simple as like, you know, a square spray painted on a sidewalk, or it can be a parklet that Bird installs, which is something that we did in Santa Monica.
Which is certainly
we can also, we do have geofencing capabilities. Yeah. So I think to hit on your point specifically, we can, we call them virtual parking corrals, but we can designate virtually and geofence where people can close out their ride or not. And that's something that I think we'd be happy to do in areas in your district.
That is absolutely what I want to hear, because, you know, you can have all the aspirational parking areas and this and that. People are lazy, they're rude, sometimes, not people always, I don't want to say that. But, you know, and I don't want to have to, you know, that is good to hear. I certainly look forward to when and if the Transportation Department chooses to move forward with this, making sure that is part of it. Like I've said before, and I know I'm on the second or third time, it is my overwhelming concern about this. I don't want to belabor the point. I know the chairman is trying to keep us on schedule, so thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Councilor Ziegler. Thank you very much, Hannah. Martin Roeder, are you still here, Martin?
Can I'm sorry, one more comment just to Councilor Baker's earlier questions. Bird does not sell its data to any third party, and we have no intention of doing so. Thank you.
Thank you. Through the chair. Thank you. Martin, welcome. Appreciate your patience. State your name and affiliation.
Mr. Chairman, members of the City Council. My name is Martin Roeder. I live on Beacon Street between Berkeley and Clarendon. Lived there for almost 14 years now. And during that time, I should say that I'm also from NAB, a colleague of Elliot Laffer's. During that time, a bike lane has been installed along Beacon Street. And it occurs to me that this opportunity as new, hopefully non-polluting modes of transportation that are particularly suited to inner city trips come into play, that gives us an opportunity to tackle what is already a problematic situation, which I'll illustrate in connection with the Beacon Street bike lane. So since it's come in, we've actually seen some cyclists use the bike lane, which is good. We've seen other cyclists continue to use the roadway or continue to use the sidewalk. And I've even seen a few cyclists use the bike lane, but going against the one-way arrows that are clearly painted there. Now, this to me indicates a lack of understanding that not only are vehicles shared, but so are the spaces that they need to use. Another thing that one can observe is there are a few fairly simple words in the English language that too many people seem incapable of understanding. 4 of them are no, turn, on, red. And this creates a danger. The description of where people tend to walk is sidewalk. It is not side bike. It is not side scoot. And I think that illustrates, and I here reinforce what Elliot said, we really don't want to see scooters being able to use the sidewalks. And I wonder how that is actually going to be enforced, which gets back to a question that a couple of you have raised. Who's going to pay for the enforcement? But it requires staff, it requires an infrastructure, and that's something we're very concerned about. Another issue I'd like to bring to your attention is that of liability. What is the liability in the event that things go wrong, as they inevitably will? You're probably familiar, as I am, with the advice that one receives about what one should do with the insurance that is offered by car rental companies, when you should pay for it and when you should not. Who is going to be liable when accidents occur? I would like to see insurance companies involved in the discussions about how this process is going to be managed. Having said that, I'd like to end on a positive note. I'm delighted and pleased that this initiative has been taken about these vehicles that are obviously going to come into our neighborhood very soon in large numbers, before they do so in these large numbers, in contrast to the time it took, for example, for regulations about Airbnb to be introduced into the city, by which time it had already become a very large-scale phenomenon. So I'd like to thank the members of the City Council and the Mayor himself for introducing this ordinance. I think it is, as has been said, a great first step. And I look forward on behalf of NAB, and I'm sure other neighborhood organizations as well, to making sure that the views and opinions and knowledge and wisdom of residents contribute to formulating the rules and regulations that are eventually established, and then to making sure that the processes and the resources needed to implement the processes efficiently are put into place in a proper and sensible way. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Martin. A question from my colleague. Councilor Baker has a question, Mike.
So to bring up that point, I know I've dealt with before people walking on the sidewalk, the sidewalk that's ours, that's cracked, trip, whatever happens, they're suing the city. So now we're on the street, pothole, bird, flying over the handles, hit your head. Does that person now sue us? And I don't necessarily need the answer now, Chris, but it should be something as we're putting all this together. How do we as the city, because I just think there's going to be a lot of accidents. I think there's going to be a lot of people who are getting hurt.
I am not a lawyer. Michelle actually is one, so she may want to weigh on this. But there is indemnification language which is in this.
Okay.
But what that does and doesn't cover is something which we can certainly walk through.
Right now, the ordinance is written quite broadly, so we do require applicants to agree to indemnify and hold the city harmless for what happens on their products.
And that would be original entry when we open up a bird account?
No, it would go through the licensing process, so the company would have to agree to indemnify and hold harmless the city of Boston for what happens on their products.
With with everybody that's using, okay.
Correct, but the details still need to be filled in.
Yeah, to make sure that someone doesn't say, no, I think I'm going to still sue the city. Like when you talk about to tighten that language up, you want to make it so someone is unable to sue the city in the situation that I just described.
So, Councilor, this ordinance really speaks to the regulatory authority that the Transportation Department would have, and the licensing agreement with the providers. Beyond that, it doesn't get into specifics, but we can certainly flesh all that out as we work through the conversations with the community.
Well, will that language that we have with whatever these are, is that going to protect us? Do we know? Yes,
I think that we would certainly engage the advice of Corporation Counsel on that.
Okay, thank you. I'm good.
Thank you. Any other follow-up questions? Very good. Olivia Richards. Welcome, Olivia. We could state your name and affiliation for the record, Olivia, and then you have the floor.
Sure. My name is Olivia Richard, and I am a member of the Boston Disability Commission Advisory Board. And we have, as a board, have some issues with e-scooters. Big one being they're not accessible to us in general. Like, I can't hop on one to ride it. The second one being safety. Not just safety, the impact on the disability community will be significant without plans to mitigate hazards such as scooters disposed of on pedestrian areas blocking travel, inappropriate usage of motorized scooters on sidewalks and other pedestrian-only areas, and the subsequent risk of collisions with people who are unable to see or hear the devices coming. We know that there is a plan to put together an advisory board for this, and we know from the ordinance, the way it's written, there's going to be a member from the Disability Commission. That is good. We are also concerned about head injury. And I submitted a JAMA open study that was done, a peer-reviewed paper, researching the rate of injuries associated with standing electric scooter usage. And I think one of the things to highlight is only 4.4% of the study participants wore a helmet at the time of their injury. That's it, 4.4%. Helmet usage, we know from blue bikes, doesn't happen automatically. A lot of times these rides are spur of the moment. They're, you know, I'm tired, I don't really want to do this, I'm going to grab a scooter. Or it's a gorgeous day, I want to go for a bike ride. You know, they may not have the helmet on them at that moment. And it's the same complaint I see with the blue bikes, it's the same complaint I have with the scooters. And that is, there's no enforceable ordinance requiring folks to wear helmets while you're utilizing these vehicles in the city. And I think that'll go a long way to mitigating risk and harm that's done when you do hit a pothole and you fly over the handles. And I think it'll go a long way towards improving safety in the city overall when utilizing vehicles such as e-scooters, bikes, and other really fast-moving devices that are still to come out, that we haven't invented yet. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Olivia. Appreciate your testimony. Any questions from my colleagues on Olivia's testimony? And it kind of raises another issue of folks who are operating these things under the influence of alcohol or drugs, marijuana, what have you. Is there any prohibition from the companies to, you know, after a series of accidents or mishaps, that they're precluded from, I guess, ever renting these things again? Or does the city have some type of requirement? I mean, just fast forward thinking about if there's a whole bunch of folks riding this and you're down at Faneuil Hall and you have a few cocktails, you decide you're going to take a scooter indoor, you can get on the roadways indoor. If you're going to visit one of our medicinal or recreational marijuana facilities in the near future and you're going to get on one of these scooters at some point, there's got to be some responsibility and accountability in the event of an incident or an accident. It's clearly not falling under Chapter 90 at this point, but what are we as a city taking for precautions, and what are the companies that have approached you, what are they taking for precautions around alcohol and drug use around operation of these vehicles?
The obvious that all sort of existing laws would apply. I think to underscore what this particular ordinance would allow us to do, it simply allows us to create those sorts of rules to be able to respond to the comments that Olivia raised, that Elliot raised, that Martin raised, to figure out whether we choose to license or not, how do we want to govern any micromobility devices that end up on our streets, and what would be some of those pieces that we would want to make sure are in place, regardless of if or when we ever
So the ordinance sort of will take into consideration sort of an evolving, yes, I guess, industry, if you will, or at least a new sort of a transportation mode that will come into Boston. You keep your eye on it, may work out the kinks initially, and as we sort of evolve with the small vehicle sharing business, there may be some changes and tweaks that we may not be anticipating now, and/or may sort of play out, and we need to address them. So, okay. Exactly. Very good. Any of my colleagues wishing to offer any additional testimony? Any additional public testimony? If there are folks here in the audience that wish to offer some public testimony, may do so now or forever hold your peace, seeing and hearing no desire for any additional testimony. That will conclude the public testimony portion. Unless my colleagues have anything by way of wrap-up, seeing and hearing no requests. Councilor Baker has one follow-up question.
Sorry, Mr. Chair. So if a scooter or a bike runs into a vehicle, like how does that, because if a vehicle hits another vehicle, we're exchanging papers. Chris, you're on a, what are you on today? You're on a bike or a scooter, you take my mirror off. Can I go after you?
So I think the specifics, and Commissioner Michelle may have more information on that. I think the terms of any particular contract with any particular company is something which is way down the line. This is really, what are the general authorities we'd want the commissioner to have so that we can really respond to a lot of the concerns that were raised here.
Yeah.
But I think that what
I know that's a little down on the weeds. I just wanted to get it out there when we're.
I think that, the revenue, the sort of liability, I think all those things are the things which we want to make sure that we can really create the right program.
And back to the revenue, Chris, I get it. It's all a benefit to us, and I'm totally on board. But they're not doing it out of the goodness of their heart. They're making a package someplace. Where is it? And I do think that we should benefit from it. You know, again, back to Uber, 170 trips. We let that one get away from us, Chris. So, thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Baker. Final word from Councilor Matt O'Malley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you to all the folks who stuck around. Obviously, this is a very, very important issue, one that I'm glad that we're getting out ahead of. I think we have an opportunity to really set the standard. We can study to see what some cities have done. We can study to see what the shortcomings may have been or some of the pratfalls that they fell into, or potholes perhaps that they fell into, and we can make sure that we do this right. This is something that, if done well, is going to benefit the city of Boston for a whole host of reasons, and look forward to getting to work. So thank you for this. Hope you take my suggestions with the spirit they were delivered, and look forward to seeing some action on it.
Thank you, Councilor O'Malley. And with that, we have, the council has until March the 27th to take action on this. So based on, the testimony here from the administration, colleagues, questions, concerns, and comments and concerns from the public testimony, we'll obviously put together a working document and committee report. Probably get in touch with you and the commissioner at some point just to kind of iron out some of the details on some of the issues that are raised, and then try to get something before the council between now and March 27th. So with that, the docket 0209, message and ordinance amending the City of Boston Code ordinances regarding licensing and regulated shared mobility businesses, Committee on Government Operations will be adjourned. Thank you.